All right. Good morning, folks. Matthew 18. That's Acts. There's Matthew. So we're going to knock out an important section of text. Tomorrow, I want to say the text is quite beautiful. It is a beautiful picture of God's forgiveness. But today, dealing with the sinning brother. Good stuff. Verse 15 says, "Moreover, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he hears you, you have gained your brother." So Matthew 18, verse 16, "But if he will not hear, take with you one or two more, that by the mouth of two or three witnesses every word may be established. But if he refuses to hear them, tell it to the church. But if the church if he refuses even to hear the church, let him be to you like a heathen and a tax collector. Surely I say to you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, I say to you that if two of you agree on anything concerning anything that they ask, it will be done to them by my Father in heaven. For where two or three are gathered together in my name, I am there in the midst of them." All right. So let's do a little Bible study, right? All right. So to start, we've got context, right? And so Jesus warns about offenses and woe to him by whom they come, right? And he talks about how God longs for restoration, the parable of the lost sheep. But we know that offenses are going to come. So this section is a continuation. He's talking about conflict resolution. How do you deal with conflict in the church? And in all honesty, this is a message that the church needs to hear, because quite often churches are unhealthy and they're suffering from a stunting problem, a problem that stunts the growth, both breadth and depth, there we go, of the church. You're going to have fewer members and shallower members if you don't learn how to deal with your problems. Pretty straightforward. Now, of course, doing things God's way probably means that it's going to upset our flesh. Our flesh doesn't like to do things God's way. But as a Christian, with the Holy Spirit inside of you convicting you, you know that you ought to do things God's way. So let's talk about doing things God's way. "Moreover, if your brother sins against you," note, this is a sin against you, not a sin against someone else necessarily. If you're a wise, discerning, mature believer, you might witness problems going on and you may choose to step in just out of love and desire for growth and restoration. But more often than not, this is talking about a sin against you. Other people's sins and problems really isn't your business. And you're going to find that you go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. And the catch is that, one, we're trying to avoid gossip in the church. Gossip is a plague, right? Gossip is a sin. And too often, we don't even realize we're gossiping. I always would encourage people to be careful even when they pray for others, because sometimes they might be divulging information that didn't need to be said. But it's actually even somehow secretly our flesh wants to share gossip. We ask about things, we talk about people. And I'm going to say it like, I think all of us, I know that I do, and my wife, like, this isn't like I would never even think of us as gossipy people. We're not that kind of people. But sometimes I hear us just talking and we're just letting off what's on our chest. And I realize, like, I don't need to talk about other people. I don't really need to get this off my chest. And if I need to get it off my chest, I need to go to the Lord with that. I don't need to talk to another human, even my own wife, because I realize that if I have an ill feeling and I share it with her, you see, I'm spreading the bitterness that I'm struggling with, and now she has it. Hebrews talks about a root of bitterness coming into the church by which many become defiled. And that's what happens. You know, I know, and maybe I'm seeing adults here, people who are married, right? And you have friends. Now, quite often, you probably don't go and talk about your spouse to your friends and just rave all the time about all the great things they're doing and how thoughtful they are and how this and that. Sometimes we just take those good things, we take them in and just, oh, that was great. But when our spouse does something that irritates us, well, you might kind of nag about that or share about that with someone. Oh man, he was doing it again. And we realize that if all of our friends ever hears is our complaints, it makes it sound like our spouse is an evil person. And this can be about anyone. I use spouses because we're so close and it's a person whom we relate to all the time. But quite often we're quick to share the things we are upset about and not so quick about the praises. And so all we're doing ever is sharing these negative feelings. More often we'll complain about what didn't go right rather than talking about all the things that did go right. And so when we need to actually deal with this now, okay, I could go on and on about gossip, but let's talk about dealing with the problems, is that you start by going alone. If you've been sinned against, go and talk to them alone. You have a 10,000 times better chance of reaching someone alone, which will help bring the pride level down. Because when we're in front of people, we try and defend ourselves much more than if it's alone, where we're more open to being heard. This is why you will almost never change someone's mind on social media, which is why you won't see that many things where I am trying to reach out to the unbelievers about changing their views. You see, things like abortion, things like fornication and sexual immorality, if they're an unbeliever, I honestly have zero faith that I am going to change their minds on those types of issues over the internet, which is why I just almost never talk about them in this forum. But in other forums, I will. Now, I will encourage believers, people with the Holy Spirit inside of them. I will work on them and I will nudge you guys and I will try and encourage you guys and make you guys think about some tough things. But that's different because you're coming because you want to change. Even if you don't want to change, you do want to change. You know what I mean? And so if someone sins against you, go deal with that alone. One last rabbit trail before hopefully the ball gets rolling and we move through the rest of these verses is I've had people come and tell me before, because I have, and I don't make it a habit, but on occasion I will name names. I will post on social media about false teachers. And oftentimes I don't like to, because still again, people who love those guys, my post probably won't change their mind, right? And in fact, if I see a Christian, a baby believer, I'm going to assume a baby, who's following another church that's got some weird teachings and false teachings, but they love their church. Well, if I put their pastor on blast, I probably will push them away and I will lose the influence I have on them. But if I lovingly teach the truth and they start seeing that, they may slowly move away from that pastor. But that said, Paul named names. There are times to do that. And I've had people then come and say, well, Matthew 18, you're supposed to go to your brother alone. And I honestly had to reply to the person because they were trying to say that I was, you're not doing Matthew 18. You're supposed to address the brother privately. And I'm like, I don't think Joel Osteen's going to take a meeting with me. And he didn't sin against me. This is about a brother sinning against you. He was just teaching bad stuff, and I brought it to light, and I was willing to say it. So all that said, this is personal. This is not, you can't call out someone. Christians have to do it one-on-one. Well, no, context. This is a one-on-one. So now imagine, though, with your friends, with your family, specifically your church family. If someone sins against you, okay, you have two choices. Literally, Christian, I don't know of a third choice. So, listen. If you are offended or hurt by another Christian, you have only two choices. You take it to the Lord, you confess it to Him. This should always be first step one anyway. And you let it go. And you forgive your brother or sister because they're a sinner just like you are. And they know they're called to love you, but they fail at it just like you do, right? They get in the flesh just like you do. So you just let it go. And you don't get all bent out of shape over it. But if you can't let it go, festering is not option two. That is sinful. And that is that bitterness. The root of bitterness, when it gets itself into the church, it spreads. And again, Hebrews, and by which many become defiled. You will spread your bitterness to the church, and that's not okay. So if taking it to the Lord doesn't work, and it doesn't always work because you're a sinner and you have a hard time forgiving people, then you go to step two. You must confront the person. You don't need to ask everyone and their cousin for advice. You absolutely don't need to tell other people about the bad thing they did to you. You confront them. Might you desire to seek the advice of an elder, pastor, someone? Yes. Maybe you would go to someone respected in your church for wisdom. That's not gossip. Many Christians actually avoid getting good counsel because they're afraid to gossip. It's funny because, man, it's like, how do I handle things? Well, it's actually walking a very fine line to deal with these conflicts and not fall into gossip, but at the same time not sit around and do nothing. When do I share? When do I not? I've told people sometimes they've shared such ambiguous stuff with me. I'm like, I don't even know what to do with that because you were trying not to gossip, but then I'm just confused. I can't help you. So maybe go to someone for advice, but eventually you're going to go to that person and you're going to confront them. And if they receive it, if they hear you, you've gained yourself a brother or a sister. So verse 15 is done now. We hit the rest. 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 now. No, but in short, if they receive you, it's done. Now, if they don't, maybe go take that wiser person, someone whom both parties respects. That's kind of the idea, is taking someone where it's not like you show up with your tag team wrestling partner, but you show up with someone whom you both mutually respect, who can mediate the situation. That's the idea, is that there's a mediator, not a 2 and 3 on 1. But if he refuses to hear them, verse 17, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to hear the church, let him be to you like a heathen or a tax collector. So once again now, you need to be considering how big of a deal this is. Maybe after they reject you and the other person, right? Maybe you show up with a third party and you watch them harden their hearts. Maybe when you witness just how hard, because at this point, that other person probably has a very hard heart. Maybe at that point, it's actually, you can go back to step one and taking it to the Lord, and you just recognize, Lord, they offended me, but they've obviously got a heart problem. And I can just let this go at this point because I realize it's not me, it's them. But if this is truly an offense that needs restoration, and those can exist, okay, then it goes to the church. It goes to the whole church, and the church gets to see and hear that No, this person's in sin. They're doing things that are wrong, and it needs to be dealt with. Now, verse 19 and 20 are a couplet, a pair, and they are in the context of verses 15 to 18. Whether you like it or not, listen up. So Jesus now assures them, again, I'm saying to you, if you agree on earth concerning anything that they ask, it'll be done by my Father in heaven. So first off, we have this like name it and claim it, right? Anything you ask, it'll be, well, it's the context. What would be asked at this point? Is Jesus talking about, transportation needs? Give me a Ferrari, Lord. Billy agreed with me. Make it done. No, it's talking about church discipline. It's talking about when you brought 2 or 3 people with you to see the situation, and the 2 or 3 people were in agreement, Billy wronged Bobby. Then God says, essentially, assuming you got mature Christian believers, there's a lot of, I think, assumptions here that we're talking about healthy Christians dealing with some issues. Well, God says, I'll agree. Yeah. If Huey, Dewey, and Louie say that Billy wronged Bobby, then God's going to say, I'm going to agree with Huey, Dewey, and Louie. Now, verse 20. For, so this ties again. It's tying backwards. We started verse 19 with again, he's referring backwards. Verse 24, what is it there for? Well, it's backing up. Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I'm there in the midst of them. Now, this is probably one of the most frequently misused Bible verses, but that's kind of okay. The context, where 2 or 3 are gathered, I'm there in the midst of them. It's talking about during church discipline. When you need to discipline someone and you have people gathering to work on a dispute, Jesus is reminding them that I'm there. I know this is a scary situation. I know this is hard to deal with, but I'll be with you. So often people just talk about when the church assembles, 2 or 3 are gathered, Jesus is there. Here's a little secret. Just between you and me, Jesus is always with you. Even if 2 or 3 people aren't gathered, Jesus is there. So it's no magic formula. If 2 or 3 gather, then Jesus will be there. No, Jesus is always there. But as you're facing a difficult circumstance like this, church discipline, dealing with a sinning brother, well, Jesus is trying to reassure you that if the 2 or 3 of you agree, I'll back you up. And as the 2 and 3 of you gather to deal with this, don't worry, I'm right there with you. So, it's not wrong to say if 2 or 3 are gathered, Jesus is there, because if 1 is gathered, Jesus is there. So, not wrong to say, but usually we're referring to this verse and it's actually out of context. So, sorry if I popped a bubble there. But dealing with issues is important. Letting things fester is a big problem. I don't have that Hebrew verse perfectly memorized, but let's see here. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 15, looking carefully. Well, let's back up. Verse 14, pursue peace with all people. So see, this is kind of the context of our what book are we in? Matthew text. Pursue peace with all people and holiness, without which no one will see the Lord. Looking carefully, lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble, and by this many become defiled. So that's what we're called to do. We're called to deal with problems, not ignore them. And we need to deal with it in a biblical way. Not going off and telling everyone, we tell it to the Lord. If you have a problem with someone, tell it to the Lord. If someone was behaving a certain way at church today, tell it to the Lord. That's the idea. You need to take it to the Lord. And if you cannot receive peace from God and just simply forgive, then you need to deal with the problem the biblical way found in Matthew 18. And it might be hard to do that, but don't worry, because where 2 or 3 are gathered to deal with church discipline, Jesus is there in the midst. God bless you guys. It'll be a fun. Is it the unjust? Unjust steward tomorrow, right? Right. Matthew. I'm in John. I lost my place. So I took my bookmark out. There's Mark. There's Matthew. Oh. Yes, the parable. Oh, of the unforgiving servant. Yes, that's the one that's tomorrow. So should be exciting. All right. God bless you guys. I will see you guys around. Stay in the Word. Pray. Get in fellowship. We all need it.